Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Glad to be here for this one.
So picture this. You're carefully holding a 3,000-year-old Babylonian clay tablet in your hands, and you are absolutely terrified you might drop it and just shatter human history.
Oh, the pressure.
Right. And you've gambled thousands of dollars to master these dead languages. You've applied to 15 elite PhD programs to study the ancient world, and you receive exactly 15 crushing rejection letters.
Brutal.
Yeah. But then, through this totally bizarre twist of academic fate and like a terrifying leap into a totally different discipline, you end up excavating in Athens and deciphering early Christian magic amulets.
It's honestly such a wild narrative. It's really the perfect case study for why our most rigid career plans, those ones we map out with perfect chronological precision, well,
Yeah,
they often need to be completely broken before we can actually find our true intellectual purpose.
exactly. And before we get into the mechanics of this incredible journey, if you enjoy the channel, please subscribe and hit the like button.
Definitely do that.
Because today's deep dive is a biographical reflection by an academic researcher named Andrew Henry. He originally shared this story because a physics vlogger named Simon Clark prompted it, and his Patreon supporters actually voted for him to tell it.
Which is great because our mission today is really to explore how academic paths and just professional paths in general are rarely straight lines.
Right.
Because this story begins with a trap that I think so many ambitious people fall into, which is the illusion of the perfect trajectory.
Yep. Let's start there.
Yeah.
Because he's a very confident undergraduate history major.
Right, absolutely. He has this clear, unshakable vision. He wants to be a Roman historian.
Like, he knows his identity, he's mapped his trajectory out.
Yeah, and he really believes he has checked all the requisite boxes. I mean, he's a history major, he's taking Latin, he's taking Greek.
So in his mind, he is building the absolute perfect resume.
Exactly.
But then this brutal reality check hits him, just as he starts looking at graduate school applications.
Right, because he realizes he only has 2 years of Latin and just 1 year of Greek under his belt.
Which, I mean, to anyone outside of academia, spending a couple of years learning ancient dead languages sounds incredibly impressive.
It does. It sounds like plenty of preparation to a layperson.
Yeah, I think so.
But we really have to look at the mechanics of ancient history PhD programs to understand why that level of language proficiency makes an applicant, well, completely uncompetitive.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why is that?
These programs operate under a very specific set of constraints. They are not designed to teach you the foundation of a language.
Oh, so they expect you to basically hit the ground running.
Exactly. They expect you to arrive already possessing the tools to read primary texts fluidly.
I'm trying to visualize what that actually means in practice, though. Like, why is that baseline so ridiculously high? Why can't a student just, I don't know, use a dictionary while they figure out the history part?
Because historical accuracy relies entirely on nuance. Ancient Greek and Latin words often carry multiple, really ambiguous meanings depending on their context.
So it's not just a direct word-for-word translation.
No, not at all. If you are struggling with basic syntax or you're constantly looking up vocabulary, you just can't participate in high-level historical debate.
That makes sense.
You won't notice when an ancient author is using a highly specific verb to, say, subtly mock a political rival.
Oh, wow.
So these programs want to see 3 to 5 years of demonstrated mastery in both languages, because the language is literally the only lens we have into that world.
Right.
And if you lack that lens, your application is simply discarded, straight in the trash.
Man, the realization that you are fundamentally unqualified for your own dream is a heavy pivot point. I mean, think about it like trying to join an elite sports team.
Oh, good analogy.
Like, you've been training for years, you feel at the top of your game, and you show up to the national tryouts only to realize you've actually just been doing, like calisthenics.
Exactly. You don't even have the baseline cardiovascular conditioning to step onto the field with the real contenders.
Yeah, and to fix that, you basically have to put yourself through an extreme, punishing basic training.
Which is exactly what he does. It leads him to pivot to a post-baccalaureate program at the University of Pennsylvania.
A post-bac?
Yeah, these post-bac programs are really fascinating structures within academia. They basically function as intense language boot camps.
I'm so curious about the financial and structural reality of a program like that, because he already has his bachelor's degree at this point, right? But he isn't getting a master's degree yet.
Correct. They are completely non-degree programs.
Wait, really? No degree at the end?
No degree. I mean, they're cheaper than a full master's degree, but The significant catch is that you do not receive a formal credential.
That is wild.
You are paying purely for the intense volume of knowledge. The whole goal of the program is to take a student, cram as much high-level Latin and Greek syntax into their brain as humanly possible over a single year, and then just release them back into the PhD application market.
Wow. So it is a massive financial and temporal gamble.
A huge gamble.
You're spending thousands of dollars not for a diploma to hang on your wall, but purely for the raw skill needed just to get your foot in the door.
Exactly.
But so during this grueling language cram session at UPenn, he lands this really remarkable position on the side. He starts working at the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology.
Right, on the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative,
Right.
which is a really monumental effort in historical preservation.
What were they doing exactly?
They were tasked with scanning ancient Sumerian and Babylonian tablets to digitize them for global research.
And this brings us back to that visceral image we started with. He is physically handling 3,000-year-old clay tablets.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I really want to dwell on the physical reality of that for a second. Because these aren't like sturdy stone blocks. These are often small, super fragile lumps of clay with tiny wedge-shaped impressions on them.
Very fragile.
He is holding the ancient world in the palm of his hand, trying to manage the very real fear of dropping and destroying a piece of human heritage.
The juxtaposition there is just so striking.
Yeah, how so?
Well, on one hand, he's grinding through abstract Latin grammar rules in a classroom feeling totally inadequate.
Right.
But on the other, he is physically touching the tangible output of ancient civilizations at his job.
Oh, that's such a good point.
That tactile connection to history must have profoundly validated his career choice. It probably caused his confidence in his upcoming applications to just skyrocket.
Oh, definitely. He had rebuilt his profile entirely. He had the UPenn pedigree, the archaeology museum job, solid GRE scores, strong recommendation letters.
He looked good on paper.
So he submits his applications.
Yeah.
And the timeline for U.S. PhD applications is, it's a slow, agonizing process.
Oh, the worst.
You send your materials away in November, December, and then the waiting begins. January passes,
Yeah.
February passes.
And the silence of that waiting period is its own psychological test, honestly.
I can imagine.
There's this well-known, unspoken rule in the academic application cycle. If April arrives and your inbox remains empty, the process is over.
The silence itself is a rejection letter.
Exactly.
So he applies to 15 elite programs, feeling incredibly confident about his newly forged qualifications. And the result is a 100% failure rate.
Yep.
All 15 schools reject him.
It's devastating.
I'm trying to put myself in his shoes here.
Uh-huh.
To spend a year doing a grueling boot camp, spending thousands of dollars holding those tablets and feeling like you are finally part of the club, only to have 15 different committees look at your profile and say no.
What's fascinating here is that we have to look at the mechanics of academic filtering to understand why this happens, because
Yeah.
it is rarely a simple judgment of intellect.
Really, it's not just about who's smartest.
Not at all. PhD programs are hyper-competitive environments dictated by funding limitations, faculty bandwidth, and highly specific cohort building.
Okay, so a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff.
Precisely. An applicant might be brilliant, but if the one specific professor who studies Roman economics isn't taking students that year, the door's shut.
Wow.
Or if the department just admitted 2 Roman historians the previous year and they really need a Greek historian now, it doesn't matter how good you are. The door remains shut.
But the applicant doesn't see those internal departmental politics. They just see 15 closed doors.
Exactly.
And I think most people would view that as a definitive signal from the universe to just change careers entirely.
Most would, but his response is this masterclass in resilience, probably born out of desperation.
Yeah.
He doesn't walk away. He immediately signs up for a second year of the Post-Bac program.
That is dedication.
He decides to subject himself to the boot camp a second time. Another year of intense Latin and Greek, another year of working at the museum, just betting that a second attempt will yield a different outcome.
But he does adjust his approach, right? He applies to 12 schools instead of 15, and he's far more targeted.
Yes.
And this time, the strategy works. He receives 4 offers.
Finally.
3 of them are exactly what he envisioned. They're placements in history departments.
Right?
But the 4th offer is the Anomaly. It's an offer from the Religious Studies Department at Boston University.
And that anomaly creates a massive ideological dilemma for him.
Why is that a dilemma?
Well, on paper, Boston University possessed the exact faculty necessary to support his highly specific research interest, which was early Christian magic.
Okay.
But accepting that offer required a terrifying professional step for him. He'd have to make a disciplinary leap.
Meaning he would have to abandon the identity of a historian and adopt the mantle of a religious studies researcher.
Exactly.
And he mentions his intense fear of this transition. He wanted ancient Rome. He wanted the classical, empirical world.
He dreaded the idea of taking modern religious studies methodology.
Yeah, he was terrified of having to study people like Freud, Marx, Emil Durkheim, and Max Weber. Or like taking classes on modern Islamic Sufism.
That fear is actually deeply rooted in how different academic disciplines fundamentally view the world and construct knowledge.
I don't quite get why he was so terrified, though. I mean, why is sociology so scary to a historian?
That's a fair question.
Because as a listener, it might seem like history is just theories about the past anyway. Aren't both disciplines just studying human behavior? Why does bringing in modern sociology feel like an alien invasion to a classicist?
It really comes down to the questions you are trained to ask.
Sure.
Traditional ancient history is heavily empirical and chronologically driven. A historian translates a text, verifies an event, establishes a timeline, and figures out what happened and when.
So it feels very solid and grounded in tangible evidence.
Yes, but religious studies methodology, particularly the sociology of religion, asks functional questions.
Functional questions.
Right. When you read Emil Durkheim, you are learning about how religion functions as a social glue to bind communities together.
Oh, I see.
When you read Max Weber, you are looking at how belief systems shape economic realities.
So a historian asks, did this ritual happen on this date? While a sociologist asks, what psychological or social utility did this ritual provide to the community?
Precisely. And if your entire academic life has been focused on translating the exact grammar of a Roman treaty, well, suddenly being asked to apply modern sociological theory to a modern Sufi mystic practice feels entirely irrelevant to your goal.
It feels totally abstract.
Abstract, subjective, and completely disconnected from the ancient dirt you actually want to study.
But he takes the leap anyway.
Yeah.
Primarily because BU had the exact faculty match for his niche.
Yep.
So he sits down in those dreaded methodology classes, bracing himself for irrelevant theory, and he experiences a total paradigm shift.
It's amazing.
He gets completely hooked.
He actually describes it as being converted to religious studies. The very theories he feared ended up unlocking his research in ways history alone never could.
Let's examine how that actually altered his work, because this is where the interdisciplinary approach really shines.
Absolutely.
His dissertation focused on early Christian magic. Specifically, he was looking at the intersection between official early Christian liturgy, the standard prayers and church rituals, and underground early Christian magic.
He had identified this truly fascinating historical phenomenon. Official Orthodox liturgical phrases were frequently showing up inscribed on illicit magical artifacts.
I want to make sure we ground this into physical reality for a second. When we say magical artifacts, we're talking about physical amulets.
Right.
Picture a small, tightly rolled silver or copper tube that someone would wear around their neck to cure a fever or, ward off a demon. And inside that tube is a tiny scrap of material quoting an official church psalm.
Now, if we connect this to the bigger picture, if he had remained strictly within the silo of a traditional ancient historian, his approach to those amulets would have been very limited.
What would he have done differently?
He likely would have translated the Greek, cataloged the artifact, dated it to a specific century, and just published a descriptive paper noting its existence.
But because he was swimming in religious studies theory, he possessed new conceptual frameworks.
Yes, exactly.
He mentions concepts like performativity and orality and religious ritual. How did those ideas change his analysis of a silver tube with a Bible verse in it?
Well, performativity is a crucial concept here. It's the understanding that language does not merely describe reality, it acts upon it and alters it.
Like an action.
Right. Consider a modern wedding ceremony. When an officiant says, "I now pronounce you married," those words do not describe a state of being. The words themselves actively change the legal and social reality of the two people.
The speech itself is the action.
Exactly. And when you combine performativity with orality, which is the immense tangible weight that spoken words carried in the ancient world, you begin to understand the mindset behind the magic.
Okay, I think I'm following.
By studying the theory of religious ritual, he realized these ancient people weren't just writing down a nice prayer. They believed that physically inscribing a performative liturgical slogan onto an object captured the raw power of that ritual.
So the physical text basically becomes a battery, storing the energy of the spoken ritual.
Yes.
That realization leads to the next massive shift in his career, which is focusing on the materiality of religion.
The physical stuff.
Right. He realizes that understanding ancient belief requires way more than just reading manuscripts in a quiet library. It requires engaging with the physical stuff that regular people actually touched, held, and relied upon in their daily lives.
It demands an investigation into the lived reality of the practitioners, not just the elite theology written in texts.
And to truly study the materiality of religion, he realizes he needs to know how to pull these objects out of the ground himself.
Naturally?
So he travels to Athens. He excavates at an archaeological site called Olympus. He literally trains to become a dirt-under-the-fingernails archaeologist so he can unearth and contextualize the physical amulets and inscriptions that carried these magical phrases.
And we arrive at this incredible synthesis of skills. I mean, he has merged his grueling language boot camp training, his newfound sociological and performative theories, and the physical science of archaeological excavation.
And that synthesis is the direct result of being forced into an interdisciplinary environment.
Totally.
He notes how deeply his research thrived because he wasn't just sitting in a room with other Roman historians. He was in a department surrounded by scholars studying Buddhism, Hinduism, and Judaism.
Constant cross-pollination.
Yeah, he was constantly exchanging ideas with anthropologists, sociologists, and philosophers.
To understand why that matters, we can look at a medical analogy.
Okay.
Studying something as vast and complex as human religion, or how humans use magical rituals to navigate the terror of disease and uncertainty, is like diagnosing a complex medical condition.
Right.
If you only look at one metric, you fail the patient. The historian is checking the patient's medical chart for past events. The linguist is looking at the microscopic blood work. The sociologist is asking about the patient's environment and lifestyle. And the archaeologist is taking the X-ray.
Oh, that's brilliant. If you rely on just the blood work, you miss the environmental factors completely. But when you put all those specialists in the same room, examining the exact same patient, you finally get to see the whole human being.
That is the ultimate function of the methodology he initially feared, that different lenses come together to reveal how religion actually functioned on the ground, in the dirt, rather than just how it was idealized on a piece of parchment.
Now, he does admit that the transition was deeply intimidating. I mean, his identity as an aspiring traditional Roman historian was the foundation of his entire career plan.
It was who he was.
Yeah. But looking back, he recognizes that being pushed into the religious studies department fundamentally transformed him.
For the better.
He evolved from an applicant terrified of failing to be a historian into an expert who fluidly combined classical languages, archaeology, and theoretical sociology.
And I think the broader implication for you listening today is really profound. True expertise, or becoming a genuine researcher in any field, is rarely about simply accumulating more facts to stack neatly on top of your existing worldview.
Right.
Real growth occurs when you allow your established perspective to be shattered, and then rebuilt by engaging with disciplines and methodologies that initially make you uncomfortable.
Because if he had successfully been admitted to one of those first 15 history programs, he probably would have had a fine career.
Oh, sure.
He would have been a competent traditional historian, but he would have completely missed out on the sociological frameworks, the archaeological fieldwork, and the vibrant cross-pollination of ideas that ultimately defined his unique contribution to human knowledge.
He literally had to fail completely at his initial plan and suffer a 100% rejection rate in order to be maneuvered into his true intellectual home.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to ponder today. Whether you are navigating academia, charting a course in the corporate world, or simply trying to deepen your own personal passions, consider the closed doors you are currently facing.
We all have them.
Where might a perceived rejection or a forced detour that you are currently resenting actually be a hidden invitation? An invitation to abandon a rigid silo and develop a richer, more interdisciplinary way of looking at your world.
It's a great question.
Because sometimes the only way to discover what you are truly meant to do is to have 15 people tell you no.